2022-23 season. We're going to be breaking down some of the names that could potentially be Red Raiders coming up on today's Locked On Texas Tech.
Are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Texas Tech, a member of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Be sure that you subscribe to our channel if you have not already. I'm Ryan Mainville. I cover Texas Tech for the Dallas Morning News, and I'm joined by Emery Lida, a longtime Texas Tech analyst, writer, and podcaster. Today, man, we got to break down some of the names that Texas Tech's coaching staff has been in contact with because it's the offseason, or what truly feels like the second season for me, and it's been a busy one already for Mark Adams and co. All of that is coming up on today's episode, which is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. The guy that is making the rounds in more Texas Tech boards, Twitter sectors, anything. If you follow Texas Tech basketball, you've probably heard the name Fardaws Aimaq over the last couple of days. A forward dash center out of Utah Valley, stands at 6'11", shattered the Division I rebounding average last year when he averaged 15 rebounds per game. That hasn't been done since 1980. And then this past season averaged 18.9 points, 13.6 blocks, or 13.6 rebounds. Jesus, that would be insane. 1.3 blocks rather, shot 43% from deep on very low volume, 72% from the free throw line on pretty good volume. I mean, Emery, this is a stat sheet full of numbers that looks really, really good. What have you seen on the tape from Aimaq?
Well, first off, it's really important to know that Aimaq is a very good rebounder. I mean, you really don't need to look at the tape to realize that. Like, anytime someone averages 13 rebounds per game in a season, and it's considered to be maybe a little bit of a down year for him in that sense, it's pretty ridiculous. And the tape would bear that out. I mean, obviously, he gets a lot of his production on the defensive glass, which I do think is a little bit scheme related, but certainly offensive rebounding has a lot of tenacity. But really, I think the bigger focus is what he can do on the offensive side of things. And he's a really good post player. That's the first thing. You're probably not going to find a better post big out there. And I don't think he's quite as good as a finisher as a guy like Bryson Williams per se. But it's one of those things where he is really comfortable making his own offense out of there. And if you want to talk about bigs that have done that in the past, you could think of like a Nemish Keita. I think he's of that similar type of mold in terms of just his ability to get to spots on the post. I don't think he's a particularly great finisher, and I think that's one of the things that maybe limits him a little bit, but certainly his post feels good. He's able to take a wide variety of shots from the post. He's good at finishing at the rim when it comes to sort of more designed offensive sets, and I feel like he can play in a variety of different roles. Obviously, we saw his pick and pop game develop over the course of last year. If you watch the film, almost all of the attempts that he took were from the top of the key, and I have questions about that release. I think it's a little bit sketchy, but certainly it's not out of the question that he can develop a shot to be more efficient on volume, and that's one of the things that I think I would be most intrigued about him as a player, because if he can get that volume shot down, that kind of changes the outlook of him as an offensive player. So offensively, I think he really provides a lot of post value to you. We mentioned yesterday about what Mark Adams wants to do from an offensive standpoint. And if Adams wants to run a similar style offense that we ran this year, where you saw a lot of Bryson Williams post up and just sort of force feeding the ball inside, I think that is a really good opportunity, is a really good guy to use for that, just because he's someone that I also think is decent as a playmaker, certainly not quite as developed as you might want him to be. I think that's something you could work on, but he's certainly competent from there. You could play out of the post. So offensively, the value is really with the post up and the potential for a shot. And defensively, I mean, I'm not all that high on him defensively. I feel like he's going to struggle some moving laterally. Certainly is probably the least switchable big that we've seen Tech really heavily go after in recent years from a transfer standpoint. But, I mean, you never know. He's got good instincts when it comes to shot blocking and is a decent rim protector. So, I mean, certainly there's a lot to work with him. Obviously, the rebounding takes center stage. The post offense is really good as well. Just all around, he's clearly a really good player and someone I think anyone in the country would want to add.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned the post play. I think what's really key about him there is that he has a really nice ability to make like turnaround jumpers, which I think is really important to note because we were talking yesterday kind of about Texas Tech scheme and what style of offense do they want to play. When you've only got a guy that can play back to the basket, like say David McCormick, it limits you offensively more than if you have a guy like Aimaq who can make these turnaround jumpers. But by all indications, he is priority number one for Texas Tech right now. They have offered, and he is already cutting down his recruitment to Arkansas, Kentucky, Iowa, Washington, and the Red Raiders. So certainly a guy that will need to be monitored over the coming days and weeks as Texas Tech tries to seal the deal with him. Another guy that the Red Raiders have been in contact with, it's a guy that I'm sure a lot of Texas Tech fans might be slightly familiar with, and that is the young Isaiah Cottrell. He was one of what felt like the first guys of the season to hit the portal once West Virginia's season ended. But a 6'10 forward, former top 100 recruit, played just 16 minutes per game this year, averaged 4.2 points, 2.8 boards, did not shoot well from the field at all. His past two seasons, averaging about 34% from the field over his career, with just 1.2 shots coming from deep. So I think those efficiency numbers might be a little concerning for anybody just viewing the box score. He did not have good games against Texas Tech, the two that he has played. Just 1 of 6 from the field in those two contests. But Emery, give me your thoughts on Cottrell.
I think Cottrell's got a really intriguing talent. And obviously, if you take the exact version that played at West Virginia and looked at what Cottrell was able to do, I felt like his offensive game was struggling, obviously. That's the nicest way to put it. Wasn't a good finisher despite having a lot of assisted looks. His shooting wasn't quite there, but I think it's something that he could potentially work on and get himself to be a really lethal stretch forward. And we saw it at times last year. He was able to knock down those threes. Didn't really hit him well against Tech, but I think offensively he provides potential. And I think defensively he's a really versatile player. He fits right in with what Tech wants to do. Very switchable big. I think you could run him as a 4, potential small ball 5. And I see value, especially on the defensive end. Certainly someone that has that experience playing at a Big 12 level. He's not someone you're going to be worried about in terms of taking a step up. So I think it's nice to have him there. And certainly, I mean, I think the biggest thing he can provide to you is front court depth and switchability. And both of those things we've seen in the last couple of years have been really important for Tech.
Yeah, really good athlete, and I think that's something that could really come into play for Texas Tech on the defensive end, and something that I think definitely sparked their interest once he initially hit the portal. He was one of kind of the early guys that Texas Tech reached out to, and it's been a little bit quiet since, but am keeping tabs on his recruitment. Another guy that it felt like hit the portal kind of early, and Texas Tech wasted no time picking up the phone and calling is Noah Carter. He's kind of a big wing almost. He's 6'6", 230, played basketball at UNI for the past 3 seasons. Last year, averaged 15 points per game, 4.1 boards, 1.8 assists. Shot about 48% from the field, below 30% from deep on pretty high volume, which is actually kind of surprising to me. And then about 80% from the free throw line. I've got to say, in Mark Adams and company, I trust, but with what I've seen from Carter on the defensive end and his offensive limitations from the perimeter, I'm kind of skeptical about the recruitment of Carter.
I actually think Noah Carter would be a really intriguing ad because I feel like his development as a ball handler this past season was really intriguing. And obviously you had AJ Green there, who's been kind of the primary ball handler for Northern Iowa for what seems like forever. I mean, you saw Carter really take a lead as an offensive initiator, and certainly the shooting is not what you want it to be for someone that's been specializing as a shooter over the last couple of years. I mean, someone that's 28%, but I also think the shot looks good, right? It has pretty good form. It just isn't going in very often. So I would trust those mechanics, and obviously, like I think I'm higher on him as a slasher than I think most people are, and certainly like he's not going to be a primary ball handler. But I think it's a value that sort of fits in line with what we've seen Tech go after in terms of looking at wings around that mold. I think where he sort of stands out, like you mentioned, the defensive end is questionable. I would say that he's probably one of the worst defenders we've seen Tech go after in the portal. But I mean, if they think that they can work with that, then it's worth looking at. I mean, it's not like Tech hasn't recruited really bad defensive players. I mean, look at what they did with Mac McClung and bringing him in. And I would say as bad as bad as Carter's looked on the defensive end, I don't think it's been quite as bad as what Mac McClung was at Georgetown. So, I mean, I understand looking at him. I certainly wouldn't have him as my top priority, but I do think there's talent there, and there's a potential for him to be able to really fit in.
Got two really, really good mid-major guards that we want to highlight, but first, a quick word from our sponsors. Our next partner has a product that I use every day. I started taking AG1 because I wanted better gut health. With one delicious scoop of AG1, you are absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. AG1 contains less than 1 gram of sugar, no GMOs, no nasty chemicals or artificial anything, while still tasting good. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/college. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/college to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. I love March Madness and bracket contests, but I can't remember the last time I actually went deep and won any money. I'm hedging my bets this year with StatHero. StatHero's NCAA single pick'ems pit the star players against each other in an amazing hybrid between fantasy and sports gambling. Start focusing on the players you know best with a gameplay that doesn't rely on big spreads, long odds, or funky props. StatHero gives you the advantage, resulting in their gamers winning 4 times more often. Why? Because StatHero eliminates the mystery about who or what you are going up against. StatHero is the easiest and fastest way to get your sports action fix. The simple, sleek gameplay will have you playing in minutes. This is what daily fantasy was meant to be. StatHero. Thanks again for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. Just a reminder that we are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, talking some potential Texas Tech transfer portal targets. And one name hit the portal the other day. Emory, he's both from your neck of the woods and also Texas Tech's neck of the woods, and that is Tristan Newton out of Burgess High School in El Paso, Texas. Was all AAC player last season and is just a phenomenal guard, man. The numbers that he puts up are really, really intriguing. Averaged 17.7 points per game last year, 5 assists, 1.5 steals, about 5 boards. Shot nearly 50% from the field, 33% from deep, and almost 88% from the free throw line. This is a guy that has a lot of potential, and I've been talking the last couple of days, probably at nauseum, about Texas Tech getting a Davion Warren type player. And this feels like a guy that you can be comfortable with, both getting his own shot and creating for others. I mean, he's got 3.5 turnovers per game last season, but I definitely think that's something that could improve whenever you put him next to some more talented guys. But, man, Newton has got to be at the top of my wish list right now.
Oh, yeah. I think if you're looking in terms of pure talent in the portal, Newton might be the best player available. And he's a 6'5" guard. He's had to be the lead initiator for East Carolina literally every single year that he's been there. And East Carolina, heading into last year, really did not have a ton of success. And there doesn't look flashy per se, but they've improved each year that Newton's been there. And I think that you've seen him really be an efficient ball handler. And yeah, the 3.5 turnovers look pretty bad, but considering the amount of usage that he has to take on, and the fact that at the beginning, I don't think he was necessarily ready for that primary ball handler role. I mean, his improvement from year to year has been really cool to see. And certainly the offensive end, he's developed into a really nice scorer as well. And obviously on the inside, I don't think that he's someone that's going to be the most explosive guy out there. He's not going to stand out from a pure athleticism standpoint, but certainly, I mean, he's rangy. He's got the ability to be an impactful defensive player as well. And offensively, man, I mean, his playmaking is there. I think he's one of the best playmakers you're going to find on the market. And beyond that, I mean, the scoring, I'm really kind of trusting the shot to continue to develop. I think that's the biggest key for him, is if the shot continues to look better and better, if he can get himself to a 36, 37% shooter and really do so, which I think is possible considering if he transfers to Tech, he'd likely have a little bit less volume than what he had at ECU. I think it's a good fit, and I think that his playmaking is enough value on its own to warrant taking a look at him and offering him. but you add in the versatility that he provides. You add in the fact that he's shown himself to be a really good lead scorer at the Division I level, and at a school like ECU, like it's still a pretty good conference in the AAC to play against. So like the talent level he's going to be going against isn't going to be that much better. Like I think that it's a really good opportunity, and I mean I'm excited because I mean getting a guy like Newton would be really big. And it's not just about him as a player. It's the fact that, like I mentioned, he came into ECU when they were at a real low point as a program. And he's continued to kind of ride the ship. And we've seen ECU improve over the last couple of years. And I think that that's can't be overstated, because if you're looking at guys like a Davion Warren that sort of went through a similar thing at Hampton, like I think that this is a really good comparison between the two. And I really like what Newton can do from a role standpoint as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's got to be one of your top guys right now, just looking at his tape and what the kind of production that he's had over his college career. Definitely a guy that you think Texas Tech will be recruiting heavily. And as you mentioned, it's a transfer up. I don't think there's any debate about that, but it's not one where you lack confidence based on the increase in skill level. Like you're still playing Division I quality basketball opponents right now. And so I think there's a lot of confidence in how his game will translate to the Big 12. Another guy that Texas Tech has been in contact with, I actually just figured that out before we started recording, is Antonio Reeves out of Illinois State. Was the most important player in the MVC last season, averaged over 20 points per game, 3.5 boards, 1.8 assists, 1.1 steals, 47% from the field, 39% from deep on 6 shots per game, which is pretty ridiculous, and then 82% from the free throw line, which makes that shooting percentage seem even less like a fluke, although it was pretty low his freshman and sophomore year. Reeves, compared to Newton, is much more of the mold of a score-first guard, and man, I think that he does that, and he does that very, very well.
I have a player comp from about 3 years ago, an NBA draft. I want to see if you can think of who I'm thinking of. Drafted by the Celtics in 2020, I think.
It can't be is it Aaron Nesmith?
Yeah, I see a lot of Nesmith in his offensive game, and that he can really be an effective on-ball shooter and kind of creating his own shot. Certainly, I mean, he is not afraid to jack them up. And I think that's one of the things. The first couple of years, that shot really wasn't falling down, but he's going to be someone that's going to be able to find those shots from the perimeter. But he's also got a pretty decent driving game as well. And just in general, his offensive game is very efficient. He's not really a guy that you're going to be wowed at from an athleticism standpoint. He's not going to have like a 50-60 dunk season. He's not going to be an overly explosive athlete, but he's good at finding his spots. Not really much of a playmaker. I think that the assist to turnover is pretty concerning, and he can have a little bit of tunnel vision at times, and that could be something that might be an issue. But if you're looking at scoring talent in the portal, he's about as good as they get. And again, if we're talking about step up in competition, Illinois State is a good team that has been good in the Missouri Valley. And the Missouri Valley, again, it's not a top-tier conference by any means, but the level of competition there is still decent enough that it's not going to be an overwhelming jump up. And so, I mean, I buy the shot with Reeves. I think it's a really good opportunity to get someone that's an elite level shot maker. And I trust that the shot's going to sustain itself going forward. So I mean, that's the biggest thing is I trust the shot. I trust that he's still going to find a way to be a positive offensive player, even on lower volume.
And I think the thing with Nesmith too is that I'm looking at a guy like Reeves, and I even think he can do a little bit more with the ball in his hands than a guy like Nesmith could, which bodes really, really well for his scoring ability. So can definitely see Texas Tech getting involved and interested even more there. We've been talking about guys that have been playing at kind of these lower levels, but putting up some pretty crazy numbers. A guy that's been playing in a power conference, but not very much, is Chance Moore, former top 100 recruit. Played basketball at Arkansas this year, but it'd be hard to tell. He appeared in just 5 games on the bench for Eric Musselman. 2 words for Texas Tech here. Corey Williams was his primary recruiter at Arkansas. And so if Texas Tech wants to get back involved there, you've got to think that will correlate. But he's a 6'5" guard. He's really a wing. Rebounds really well. At least he did in high school. Really physical. I'm not sure specifically about his shot, yet he knocked down one at Arkansas, so not exactly a good sample size there. But yeah, I think Texas Tech will at least contact him if Corey Williams is still on the bench.
Yeah, I mean, that's a 50% three-point shooter. I mean, who cares about the volume? I'm taking that. But no, I think if you look at Moore, I think he's a really talented player. Again, fits with what you're looking for from a wing standpoint. Tough nose, certainly athletic. He's rangy, 6'5", but I think the wingspan, he's at least got a plus wingspan. I don't know exactly what it would be, but you watch it on tape and that sort of sticks out. So I think that he's going to be someone that you could really utilize. And I mean, I'm not sure exactly what if Tech will go after him or how intense they'll be. And certainly he'll have his range of attractors in the Southeast, but certainly having Corey Williams is a nice added bonus on that. So we'll see. I mean, certainly Arkansas had reason to recruit him. He's a top 100 recruit coming out of high school. Didn't get to play much, as you mentioned, but has a lot of talent. And I think he'd fit in with what Tech looks for in their wings.
Yeah, definitely a guy to watch, I think. Texas Tech has been in contact with another big ticket name from the East Coast. We're going to talk about him and a couple of other guys, but first, a quick word from Built Bar. This is the time of year that I've pretty much given up on all my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not a resolution because I actually enjoy eating Built Bar products. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat. And they're covered in 100% real chocolate. They're low in calorie, high in protein. Replace your candy bars with these, they are better. Go to Built.com and scroll down the macros chart, you'll be blown away. They're high in protein, low in calorie, high fiber, low in carb. Go to Built.com today to get your hands on some of your own. All right, Emery, before we started recording this afternoon, was on the phone talking to some of my sources where I was told that Texas Tech has been in contact with Sean McNeil, a guy that probably Texas Tech fans are a lot more familiar with than Isaiah Cottrell, but also a former West Virginia player, a guy that played JUCO basketball before heading to West Virginia. And when he was kind of in that process of transferring to the Division I level, there was a certain guy that was really, really interested in recruiting him and getting him to play basketball, and that was Mark Adams. And so now McNeil is back available. He has scored 15 points against Texas Tech. I think you're looking at a guy that has proven that he can shoot the ball at a high clip and can score. And it's just really hard to look at a guy like McNeil and think that you would be willing to turn him down. But Texas Tech has been in contact with McNeil, and it seems like Mark Adams is interested in making yet another push.
Anyone that wants to have a little bit of fun on the day that they happen to be watching this episode or listening to it wherever you get your podcasts, go take a look at Sean McNeil's JUCO highlights. It is going to be one of the best watches you're ever going to find because he was a ridiculous scorer back then, and Mark Adams obviously wanted a piece of that. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. McNeil ended up going to West Virginia. But, I mean, you're talking about a guy that is one of the best shooters that's going to be out on the market. The percentages don't really bear it out. Obviously, it's 37% this year, but it's worth noting that the degree of difficulty because of how bad West Virginia was at spacing the floor meant that McNeil did not get as many open looks as I think a player of his caliber would be getting at a school like Tech and a team that has a lot of spacing or a lot of ball handling ability around him. And outside of Taz Sherman and McNeil, there really wasn't much at West Virginia. So I think McNeil's natural shot making ability is really impressive. And certainly we've seen that against Tech. Obviously, he had the game when Sherman was out last year in Lubbock where he went off and was really the key in their victory over them in 2021. But, I mean, McNeil's a talented offensive player. I don't think that's ever going to be the question. Has a little bit of limitations as a ball handler. I certainly don't think he's going to be someone that could be a PVH for you, but has the value of a shooter that you're probably not going to find anywhere else. But the thing that concerns me about McNeil is the defensive end. And we saw it kind of rear its ugly head a little bit in West Virginia games this year where teams would exploit that one-on-one matchup and they would get him into switches. They would put him in tough spots. And I don't think it's as big of a limitation as some people make it out to be. I don't think he's unplayable on the defensive end by any means. I think he's a passable positional defender. But I do wonder if you're looking at the rest of the composition of this roster, is it going to be another scenario where his defense keeps him from playing as many minutes as you would expect a guy that's that good of a shooter to be playing? And if that's the case, are you better off optimizing your outlook on the market to get guys that can be more versatile, that maybe aren't quite the natural shooter that a McNeil is, but certainly provide the defensive value as well and aren't going to be limited to some degree in the minutes that they get because of it.
Yeah, I just have a hard time believing that Texas Tech is not going to pretty heavily recruit shooting after this season. Like, I think that they got burned a little bit
Oh
and they
yeah.
know it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a difference between saying I'm a little bit concerned about
Right, right.
how the fit's gonna be than saying, yeah, they're not gonna go after a dude that was one of the best JUCO shooters we've ever seen, and at West Virginia, despite having poor spacing, still put up really good shooting numbers across the last couple of years.
Yeah, definitely a guy that I think Texas Tech is very much interested in because of his offense. And so we'll see what happens there. Another guy that was entering the portal and a pretty high caliber player is Andre Curbelo, a point guard out of Illinois, former top 50 recruit. Kind of had a rough freshman year at Illinois despite being, I think he was on the all freshman team and averaged about 9 points per game, 4.2 assists, but was kind of that true point guard, true freshman point guard that's just really hard to do on high volume in Division I basketball. And he had 2.6 turnovers, could not hit the backboard with a beach ball from behind the arc. And I think a lot of Illini fans were really just hoping for a dramatic turnaround this season. And he ends up being pretty unhealthy for the majority of this season, averages one less assist and more turnovers per game, as well as nearly 2 fewer points per game. So I think Curbelo is going to be a really polarizing guy to monitor the recruitment of over the course of this offseason. I don't really know where Texas Tech is at in their recruitment of him. I don't know if they've spoken. I'm assuming so because I'm guessing that pretty much everybody is going to make a phone call just for the sake of his upside. But a very polarizing player where really the only way you justify recruiting him is if you feel like you are in need of a primary ball handler.
I think if you're looking in terms of raw talent as a primary ball handler, Curbelo might be one of the most talented ball handlers in the country next year, regardless of where he goes. His freshman year might have been rough, but the stretch of games at the end of the Big Ten season where Illinois was able to wrap up conference title and end up getting the 1 seed in the NCAA tournament was some of the best basketball that I think you could have ever seen from a freshman point guard in the Big Ten. And he showed a whole lot of poise there. And I mean, you look at some of the stretches of games, he had 3 straight games against Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ohio State down the stretch of that year, where he had over 15 points in each of them, was efficient from the field, was a high-level primary ball handler. Like, this is a guy that when he's on is absolutely dazzling. Obviously, people are going to look at the highlights and be amazed, kind of ignores the lowlights as well. That with those amazing plays, he also makes a lot of boneheaded decisions. But if you can channel that, I mean, you're not going to find someone that's as creative as of a passer. And I firmly believe that that's something that can really raise the floor of a team, and can certainly really raise the potential as well. But at the same time, I mean, it all comes down to what you want from a guy. Like, I would say Curbelo's lack of shooting, I mean, I don't think it's quite as bad as sub 20% 2 straight years. I think that he's going to naturally improve on that as he gets more healthy and as he kind of adjusts to the level of competition in college basketball. Because that's the other thing. He's been hurt 1 year and it was his freshman year the other. So it's not like he's really had a massive sample. But certainly the relative lack of shooting and the fact that offensively he can be a little bit of a loose cannon at times, and defensively he can be sort of a liability as well. Like, you add those things together and it makes sense why you might be a little bit hesitant to really go after him. But at the same time, I mean, you're not going to find guys with the passing ability of Curbelo very often. And so if that's something that Mark Adams really wants and values, that skill set, I could see him happening. But if he doesn't want that elite level passing and kind of just the pure creativity and the potential to be an outstanding transition player, I could really understand why you wouldn't want to go after him.
Yeah, one last guy to talk about before we get out of here today. A name that's been intriguing for me to monitor over the last couple of days after he entered the portal. Kind of difficult to track down and figure out really who he is because he goes by a couple of different names. Entered the NBA draft last season, got some good feedback, and then came back to school. And I think he had maybe a different year than a lot of people were expecting, but still nonetheless has a lot of talent, a lot of athleticism. a lot of defense, and a guy that Texas Tech fans are very familiar with. Emery, any guesses as to who I'm talking about here?
Oh, man.
Texas Tech fans are very familiar with him.
Very familiar. Like, from a opposition standpoint?
Like he's played 90 games for the Red Raiders over his career.
Oh.
60
Oh, my
games,
God.
whatever it is.
60. Are you talking about a certain TJ Shannon?
I am talking about a certain TJ Shannon. Yeah, I don't know how much is fair or well sourced to say live and unedited, but a guy that hit the portal at, I think, a time that was unexpected and has publicly said that a return to Texas Tech is possible. And while that seemed very unlikely a week ago, let's just say it's changed, and I think that it's more likely now than it was a couple of days ago. That's all I feel comfortable saying at this point. But yeah, what do you think about the possibility of TJ Shannon being in the Scarlet and Black for another year?
I'll say that for a player that announced that he was intending to transfer before he got on the plane to go back to Lubbock, you would certainly say that there's been a lot of PR effort on both sides to support Texas Tech and support TJ Shannon, going both ways. And I don't think that would happen if that bridge was completely burned and there was no interest on either side of coming back. And certainly, I mean, fans have been up in arms over what happened. And I don't think it's fair to publicly take one stance on it or another. But I do think that it's clear that the last few days we've seen sort of a shift in direction. What was once seen as like almost a foregone conclusion, and the only reason he'd be making these tweets was to be like soothing over the fan base. I think there's genuinely a possibility he comes back. I think that we've seen that, and I mean, I'm all for it. I think Terrence Shannon is one of the most popular. Wow, one of the most talented players you're gonna find on the market. That bears out based off of who's been offering him. It's clear as day to any Texas Tech fan that's watched 90 games worth of his tape. So for him to be out there and open to coming back, I think you have to pull the trigger if at all possible and just try to see if that happens. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's all based off of what the staff wants, what TJ wants, and kind of a combination of both. So we'll see. Certainly seems more likely now, but it's all up in the air, man. I would never have expected to have this discussion 5 days ago.
Yeah, one of the strangest situations I've ever covered as a journalist. Like, just being honest, it's been very, very difficult and intriguing to report on, and I'm learning a lot of lessons about just my job and the difficulty that it can entail at times. But Kentucky is very, very interested. You got to think Illinois is also up there, and then you've got Texas Tech. So, yeah, 3 pretty high caliber schools in the mix here. And I just know that regardless of what happens over these next couple of days, we're going to be recording a podcast talking about the results of this. And I'm going to be very surprised either way.
At this point, I'm not going to be surprised with anything, but I think that in itself might lead to some surprise, because it wouldn't surprise me if he just pulled a 180 and declared for the NBA draft and just left it at that. Like, I don't think there's no move that looks like the consensus here. Like, you could say, yeah, he could go to Illinois, but that'd be a complete just flip from everything he's done the last few years. And Illinois is a program that has had kind of a mixed bag when it comes to high-level talent, high-level recruits, and you have to think that might play into it. Obviously, you go to Kentucky, there's the talent draw there. There's the fact that Kentucky looks like they're building a stacked roster for next year. But it's unknown. You don't know what TJ wants, you know? Could be he wants to be the main guy, at which point going to Kentucky really doesn't make a lot of sense. Could come back to Texas Tech a week after supposedly the bridge was burned and things were looking all down according to pretty much everyone. And there was like a 5% chance of him returning. And somehow that might be the most likely option at this point. So there's a million different things that can happen. I'm not going to be surprised regardless. I think it's at this point, this is one, like you mentioned, it's one of the most bizarre situations I've ever seen. And we'll see. We'll see what other twists are still yet to come in the college career of TJ Shannon.
Yeah, so we got one guy that won't be surprised no matter what, and one guy that will be surprised no matter what. So it's destined to be a really exciting offseason and a really exciting next couple of weeks as we try and keep a pulse on the TJ Shannon situation. But thank you for tuning in to our Transfer Portal Targets episode. Just be sure that you subscribe to our feeds and show us some love wherever you get podcasts. Go subscribe to our YouTube channel if you have not already. And then you can keep up with us on Twitter. You can follow me at rmainvillelbk. You can follow Emery at Eraser41, and you can follow the official Locked On Texas Tech Twitter page at Locked On TTU to get notified every time we upload a new episode. But until then, thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow.